Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, counsel for both parties have entered into the following stipulation, and they have asked me to read it to you. And again, this is a stipulation between the state and the defendant through their attorneys. There was just mention of underwear. That garment was determined not to be related to this case. Do not consider it for any purpose whatsoever. The reference to underwear by this witness is stricken from the record. Mr. Barker, you may proceed.
All right, Erin, just before the break there, we were talking about some of the items you tested. Let me just get to some of those items. We talked about the rifle. Now let's first explain to the jury what you're actually doing when you're looking at an item or a swab of an item. What is that process?
Well, let's begin with when it comes in for serology. We have someone that's going to process that. It could be myself or another analyst. And we're going to look at it for either blood, semen, saliva, or take a trace or touch sample from that item. Once that is collected, it's saved in the laboratory. And then later on, we'll come through and do the DNA analysis on that item. And the DNA analysis is a 4-step process. I begin by extracting the DNA from the item of evidence. I use soaps to do that. And then I'm going to quantitate the DNA or look to see how much DNA is present. I'm then going to amplify or copy the DNA. And specifically, I'm going to copy 23 areas of DNA that vary in length from person to person using chemicals. I'm then going to analyze the DNA using a genetic analyzer, which is an instrument that we put the samples on, and it measures those lengths of DNA in order to give us a DNA profile.
And a DNA profile, is that a unique thing?
Yes, it is. You get half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father, and it varies slightly from person to person, making each person unique. The exception to that, though, is identical twins. They're going to have the exact same DNA profile.
All right, so once you develop a profile on an item, and in this case, we're talking about a rifle, item 44, what are you comparing to?
We have known standards in the case that are submitted from individuals involved in the case. So victims, suspects, elimination standards will be taken from a person involved in the case. Normally, it is a cheek swab or a buccal swab. That's B-U-C-C-A-L. So it's not like a belt buckle, but it's actually the cells inside of your cheek that they take a swab from. Those are taken and submitted to us, and I'm going to run them through that same exact process that I described earlier in order to develop a DNA profile from those so that I can do a comparison to the crime scene sample that we have developed a profile from.
All right, so you develop a profile, in this case, we're talking about the rifle, developed a profile for that from swabs, is that right?
That's correct.
And then you have a known sample, in this case, for Mark Gooch, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You developed a profile for him as well?
Yes, I did.
All right, and then you compare those two and see if there's a match or not, right?
Yes.
What kind of conclusions can you reach?
Well, I can have a match where all 23 areas of my crime scene sample are exactly the same as someone involved in the case. I can also have a mixture where I have 2 or more people's DNA present in that, from that sample, and I can do a comparison to that too to see if I can get a match. It becomes more difficult the more people you have there, which then also leads us to another conclusion that we can have, which is an inconclusive sample or no results. So I can run a sample through our process and not get any results from that to develop a DNA profile.
Can you also exclude individuals?
Yes, I can.
All right. So either you make a match or there's a mixture, inconclusive, or an exclusion. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay. So going back to the rifle, in this case, you did examine some swabs from a texture area of the rifle and also the butt of the rifle, right?
That's correct.
And what were your results with those swabs?
Well, the swabs that were from the textured areas of the rifle, I could tell that it was a mixture of at least 2 people, but that's all the information that I could get from it because it was very low level and the sample is what we call degraded. So the DNA was starting to break down and I wasn't able to develop a full DNA profile at all 23 areas that we look at. And I wasn't able to make any comparisons to that. So the results then are inconclusive.
Now, we have evidence in this case that we know individuals touched that rifle. Why would it be that you couldn't find DNA from the rifle?
There's various reasons, especially on this case, I know that the DNA was already degraded or breaking down. When we look to see how much DNA is there, our step, the quantitation step, also gives us a little bit more information and will tell us whether or not this DNA is degraded or breaking down, which on this sample, it indicated that it was. And then I can see that when I look at the DNA profile too. So I know that this sample could have been exposed either to heat or sunlight. Also, something else that breaks down DNA is bacteria. In addition to that, it could have been cleaned. Cleaning agents can break down the DNA. So if someone wiped it down and used a chemical to try to clean it, that would break the DNA down too. But these are all things that could happen. I'm not sure exactly what did. I just know that it was breaking down and I did not get a full DNA profile from that item.
Let me ask you a hypothetical. If I'm touching this podium right here, am I automatically going to leave DNA that's detectable?
Not always. It's going to depend on the person. So I could come along and touch this countertop, and depending on how many skin cells I have to leave behind will determine whether or not we can detect anything here. I wash my hands a lot in the laboratory. I put on off and on gloves. So I don't always have a lot of skin cells on my fingertips to leave behind. Other people may have more skin cells there to leave behind when they touch something. We refer to those people as really good sloughers. When your cells come off, we call it sloughing. And some people just leave a lot of touch DNA behind that we can detect. Other people do not. Also, another factor is that your skin cells are dead, the ones that you're leaving behind and you're shedding. So they're already falling apart. I would like to liken it to like if you had a piece of paper and you're tearing it up, that's what's happening with your skin cells when they're coming off. So they're not always going to be intact. We're not always going to find DNA there.
You mentioned some of the things you will look for in the serology step, which is blood, semen, saliva. How do those compare as far as DNA sources to touch DNA?
Those are all much better sources of DNA, especially blood. It's one of our best sources of DNA, and then saliva and semen. They are very rich in DNA within the cells.
All right, so going back to the gun or the rifle, inconclusive as to the textured area of the rifle, but there was also a swab of the butt of the rifle. What did you find there?
That was inconclusive or no results. So again, I didn't have enough DNA to make any kind of comparisons to. I didn't even have DNA that was copying at all of those 23 areas.
Okay. And that was all the testing done on the rifle, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. We mentioned some vice grips, and we've heard testimony about this previously. Those were also tested, is that right?
Yes.
And what was the result of that testing?
I was able to develop a full DNA profile from the vice grips, and that DNA profile was consistent with the profile from Mark Gooch.
All right. Do you recall, was that from a blood sample?
It was indicated in my notes that that sample was a blood sample that was previously tested by another analyst.
All right, thank you. Let me ask you about a couple body swabs. In particular, there were 4 body surface swabs from the neck of Sasha Krause, as well as surface swabs from her fingernails. And we didn't get into this, but you had comparison, or you had a known standard for Sasha Krause as well. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
All right. As far as those two surface swabs, what did you find?
I previously mentioned those were tested in our direct to DNA process to look to see if any male DNA was present. And I did have a very, very small amount of male DNA that was indicated to be there. Then I took those on further for testing, but I developed or tried to develop a different type of DNA profile from those items.
What's that different type of DNA?
I was actually just trying to develop a male DNA profile. So for females and males, we have the sex-determining genes or chromosomes that tell your body if you're going to be a male or a female. Those are indicated to us by an X and a Y. So females have two X's, and a male has an X and a Y. So when your parents pass on your DNA to you, they're going to give you half each. So your mother will give you an X because that's all she has to give. And then the father can give you an X or a Y. And when he gives a Y, that determines that there's going to be a male. So that he gives that whole piece of DNA to his son. And that is what we're looking at for a DNA profile, is just that male DNA, which also means all of the men within that paternal line are going to have that same DNA profile because they're passing it down from one to the other.
And is that referred to as a YSTR?
Yes, it is.
And that's not unique, it sounds like.
No, it is not as unique.
All right. So you further developed those swabs. We talked about the neck swabs and the fingernail swabs. And as far as the YSTR results, what did you find?
For both of those, they were inconclusive or no results. So there wasn't enough male DNA there for me to develop DNA profiles from.
Now, in your experience, how common is it to get an inconclusive or no results from testing? In particular, touch DNA.
It's not uncommon for touch DNA for us to get inconclusive or no results. It's very difficult for us to develop profiles from those samples, just for the reasons that we discussed before, between just people not leaving a lot of cell material behind, also degradation, the DNA breaking down. If you're already starting off with not a lot of material and it's breaking down, you're not going to be able to detect it.
If we had testimony that Sasha Krause, the victim in this case, that she was exposed to the elements for an extended period of time, let's say a month, what would that do to the DNA that could have been left on her?
Depending on where she was, the elements can be exposed to the DNA, and so you have sunlight, UV light that's going to break it down. If it's outdoors, the heat and the cold and the differences there are going to also work on that DNA and break it down. If there's moisture, bacteria is going to be present and start to grow, and it's also going to break down the DNA.
You just mentioned heat. Any type of heat will break down DNA?
It has to be very hot. So typically when we see samples that are taken from like inside of a vehicle where the temperature gets very hot during the day, then we'll see DNA starting to break down on samples taken from those items.
So very hot, like with steaming a car, would that be hot enough?
Yes, that could break the DNA down.
And there was another report done, this was done by another analyst, but with council permission, I'm going to ask you about the duct tape. Now, there was item 33 duct tape that was sent, and there was an apparent hair located on that duct tape. Is that your understanding?
Yes,
Okay. And another analyst within your lab tested that, is that right?
that's correct.
Talk about that and what was done on that item.
That hair was collected, and then it was run through our process to try to develop a DNA profile from it. However, when the analyst got to the step where we look to see how much DNA is there and do the quantitation, there was nothing present. So she reported that out as no human DNA was detected.
No human DNA detected on what appeared to be a hair?
Yes.
Okay. What are the complications with testing hair for DNA?
Well, for hair, in order for us to get a DNA profile within the laboratory, we really do need root material on the hair. So if anybody's ever plucked out a hair from their head and you can see that nice little white tag at the end, that's the root material. That's where we get our DNA for a DNA profile in the laboratory. We don't look for that in the lab at this point in time. We just take the whole hair and put it into a tube and try to extract the DNA from it. So we don't know if there's root material there to start with. So a lot of times when we're running hair through in the laboratory, we don't get results from it, but it could be because there was no root there. The other problem with hair is that, similar to your skin cells, it's not all fully intact. So the DNA that's present in the hair, even though it is present there, is already little tiny pieces. And so I said, our DNA profile comes from measuring lengths of DNA. Well, the lengths of DNA that are found in the hair are usually smaller than what our chemicals can copy. So we don't get a DNA profile from it.
All right, thank you. Just to wrap this up, Erin, you mentioned some of the factors that would prevent finding DNA or testing for DNA. You mentioned cleaning agents. Let me ask you specifically about bleach. What would bleach do to DNA?
Bleach breaks down DNA very well.
How do you clean your laboratory?
We actually use a bleach solution to clean our laboratory, and it's just a 10% bleach solution.
Let me ask you one other question about leaving DNA behind. If someone were wearing gloves, would that surface of the glove prevent touch DNA from being left on an item?
Yes, it would.
All right, so any barrier, in other words, would prevent DNA from being left, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
May I have a moment, Judge?
Mr. Griffin?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just a few questions to follow up. Of the, I think you mentioned 68 times that you've testified, how often do you come into the court and essentially tell them that you found nothing?
It's quite a few times. I would have to go back and check, but it seems like more often than not, that is our testimony.
And that's your testimony today, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you mentioned that a number of the things that could affect whether there was DNA could be the atmosphere, time, whether it was wiped, all those kinds of things, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
From Mark Gooch's perspective, one of the answers could be that he had nothing to do with it.
That is also correct.
I want to go back to, and I just had some confusion on the hair that you missed. You mentioned about doing some review for your other analyst. Who did that work?
That was actually Erin Daniel.
And Erin Daniel is not you. It's the same first name. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I know the answer to this, but just to help the jury out, she is no longer with your department. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. She has moved out of state.
As a courtesy, we agreed that you could, because you do the same thing and you know her work product, that you could come in and tell the results because she was unavailable. Is that also correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And just so that I'm clear for what you've mentioned about what Ms. Daniel did, could you clarify, you received or you reviewed her report where she looked at duct tape and or a hair or both?
She looked at both. So she did look at the duct tape, she saw the hair, and then she collected the hair and then ran the testing on it.
So that I'm clear, we've heard testimony about a hair that was collected from a car floor. That's not this hair.
That's correct.
This is a hair that when you microscopically or otherwise examined the duct tape, you found a hair.
Yes,
That hair was ultimately determined to be not human, no DNA? What can you clarify for us?
That there was no DNA detected from it.
Does that mean it could have been animal as opposed to human, or it just means, what does it mean? Just not enough to see?
That means it's possible it could have been an animal hair, or it could have just not had any root material for us to pick up on to develop a DNA profile from.
Ms. Daniel, your fellow lab mate, did not test any fibers that you're aware of or anything like that. Is that correct? Just some of what she did?
That's correct.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Mr. Barker?
Just a few follow-up questions, Erin. With regard to hair, and counsel asked you about hair from a car, were there items submitted in this case that were not tested at all?
Yes, there were.
And is that common?
Yes, it is common for us not to test everything that's submitted. We try to start with the evidence that has the best chance of giving us a result, such as a DNA profile. So when we have items with blood submitted along with trace in, let's say, hair, we're going to try to test the blood first because that's going to give us the best DNA result. It's going to be the easiest for us to develop a DNA profile from, and then we'll work our way down. If other items are needed in the case, we do indicate to the officers in the case that they can call and request that testing at a later date.
All right, and you were asked a question about the duct tape and the hair, or apparent hair, and you said that Erin Daniel also looked at the duct tape. Was it your understanding that the duct tape was looked at for fingerprints prior to that?
Yes, that was indicated in the notes.
Would that complicate whether there was going to be any DNA on that?
On the hair itself, no, but it could complicate things a little bit on the actual duct tape for testing down the road for DNA.
And what was the reasoning behind, if you know, testing the duct tape for fingerprints before the DNA analysis?
Well, the duct tape usually has a smooth surface on the outside where fingerprints can be detected there much easier than touch DNA. So we usually save that for latent prints to do testing on, and we don't normally go back to it later for DNA because of their processing. We prefer not to, but we can if needed, but it does lead to other issues where we could get contaminants from it.
In general, as a general matter, smooth surfaces.
But they do have other processes in there that they apply chemicals to the actual surface that can start to break down the DNA.
Any other questions for this witness before the witness is excused? All right. Any follow-up? Mr. Barker?
No, thank you.
Mr. Griffin? May this witness be excused. You may be excused and step down. Have a good day. Mr. Barker, you may call your next witness.
State calls Clayton Gumm.
All right, the bailiff's cleaning off the witness stand. Come on up, please. Come towards me, but if you'd stop and look at the clerk.
Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
And then he'll direct you. You may proceed when ready, Mr. Barker.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
State your name, please.
Clayton Gumm.
Where do you work?
I work for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
And what do you do there?
I'm a special agent,
And what does that mean?
so we investigate crimes related to the illegal possession, manufacture, transportation, or diversion of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or explosives.
All right. How long have you been doing that?
Graduated the ATF Academy in October of 2020.
All right, so not too long.
Not too long.
All right. Do you know the process of tracing a firearm?
I do.
Can you explain that?
Sure. So firearms tracing, it's an investigative tool that we use to help us try to determine how an individual came to be in possession of a particular firearm.
And what will tell us what it can show, what it can't show?
So what it will show, so how it works is our tracing center will contact the manufacturer of the firearm. There's a record kept from the manufacturer to the dealer that the firearm goes to. So the tracing center will contact the manufacturer, ask them what dealer the firearm went to, and then they'll contact the dealer, ask them, did that firearm go to another dealer? If so, who's that dealer? Or did it go to an individual? And if so, who's that individual? Once that firearm is transferred from a dealer to a private individual, kind of the record or the paper trail kind of stops there. So what a trace can tell us is who the first private individual is that purchased that firearm.
All right, so if I purchased a firearm from Walmart, you'll be able to find that out?
Yes,
Okay. But if I'm handing it to somebody, a family member, probably not going to know that.
that's correct.
All right. May I approach the witness?
Yeah, so that's a certified trace results from our National Tracing Center. Sure. Okay.
All right. And can you identify the firearm that was being traced?
Yeah, so the firearm that was traced was a Marlin Model 60 SB 22 caliber rifle, serial number 011222158.
All right. And what was that rifle traced back to, or who was it traced back to?
So that firearm was traced to, the original purchaser of that firearm was James Gooch. And it looks like he purchased that firearm on August 24th, 1999 from a Walmart located in Asheboro, North Carolina.
All right. Is that a certified record with a seal on it?
It is.
All right. Move to admit 170.
No objection. 170 is admitted.
And those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin.
I have no question.
All right. Any questions of this witness from the jury before he is excused? All right. I do not see any indication. Sorry, I didn't get my microphone in front of me. I see no indication that the jury has any questions of this witness. Mr. Barker, may this witness be excused. You may step down. You're excused. Thank you. Mr. Barker, you may call your next witness.
Thank you. The state calls Jason Lurkins.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear, under penalty of perjury, the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Mr. Barker, you may proceed when ready.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
State your name for the record.
My name is Jason Lurkins. I work for the Coconino County Sheriff's Office.
And what do you do there?
Currently, I'm a lieutenant for the Williams-Grand Canyon Patrol District.
All right. And before that, what were you doing?
Before that, I was the sergeant for the Criminal Investigations Division with the Sheriff's Office.
Did that mean that you supervised Detective Nagel?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. How long have you been with the Sheriff's Office in total?
In November, it'll be 21 years with the Sheriff's Office.
All right, congratulations. Now, in this case, as a supervisor in an investigation, what is your role?
My role is to oversee the caseloads for the detectives, and then specifically with investigations, answer those questions for detectives as they come to us. As they arise throughout the case, what do you think about doing this? Well, can we go through here? Kind of like, it's just a second check for those individuals that are working those cases.
You also assist in the investigation, like hands-on?
Yes, sir, I will respond as our Criminal Investigations Division only has one sergeant, so as a sergeant, we are normally responding out to all the scenes with those detectives, especially major cases like that, to assist with processing scenes and things like that.
Now, did you go out to the scene in this case involving Sasha Krause?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right, when did that happen?
That happened on February 21st, 2020.
And we've seen a map and the approximate location of the body. Do you recall what road that was?
It was kind of in between two roads. It was the main paved road is some people would consider the Sunset Crater Monument Road. It's also known as Forest Service 545. And then the other paralleling road is a two-track Forest Service road named 244 Adam, or 244 Adam.
All right, that's a dirt road that branches off that main road, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When did you get to the scene, do you recall?
I believe I got the call from my Lieutenant Tozer, around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, around that time. And then I went out there as soon as I got changed. I was coming back from a different meeting and then changed and went out there, so it was sometime after 5 p.m.
All right. Do you recall any issue communicating while you were out at the scene where the body was found?
At the exact spot of the scene, it's very difficult. Yeah, we couldn't make phone calls from there. I had to travel the distance to make any type of outgoing or inbound calls from that location.
Do you remember how far you had to travel before you could connect?
I actually went on that Forest Service, that two-track Forest Service road, that 244 road, and went eastbound until I got high enough up on the side of a cinder cone in like an opening, and it was about 3 miles away from the scene where where Sasha's body had been found.
All right. Now, you also attended the autopsy in this case, is that right?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. May I approach the witness? There's some scissors there.
Yes, sir.
You know what it is?
This item is going to be the white metal projectile that was removed from the oral pharynx, or the back of the throat, back of the jawline, out of Sasha during the autopsy.
All right, and that was an item that you retained in evidence after the autopsy?
Yes, I collected it from the medical examiner personnel who packaged it and then turned it over to me at the ME's office. And then I took it from the ME's office back to the sheriff's office, and where it was placed into evidence there.
All right, move to admit 154.
154 is admitted.
Thank you. Now, let me jump ahead a little bit. At the time Sasha's body was discovered, you later identified her as a missing person from New Mexico, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And were you in communication with the San Juan County Sheriff's Office as well?
Yes, sir, we made phone calls with them the night of the 21st.
And did you come into possession of items of evidence that they had collected as part of their investigation?
Yes, sir, they turned over a media file, hard drive that had most of their media files and documents, electronic documents given to us.
And as part of that file, did you review some surveillance footage from a storage unit?
Yes, sir, I did.
And where was that storage unit located?
That storage unit is located on a dirt road coming up. There's a main highway that runs north and south out there in New Mexico, where the Mennonite community, we commonly refer to it as the Mennonite compound, the lamp and light compound out there. There was a main paved highway, and then there was a dirt road that came off of it. That road ran east and west straight up to where the Mennonite church was at. Between the paved road and the Mennonite church, there's a storage facility that right there on the north side of the road, of that dirt road. There's a office right there that's next to that dirt road, and it has a security camera watching the front gate, the south gate that goes into the storage complex. That camera footage captures also that dirt road that leads off of that main roadway. So any vehicles traveling east and west are captured on that camera.
You've gone out to that location as well, right?
Yes, sir, I've been out there.
I'll show you an exhibit marked as and then admitted as 131. Is that the structure you were talking about with the video camera?
Yes, sir, the video camera is a little white dot on the upper right corner of that. Yes, sir, that's the surveillance camera.
Now, we've seen some of the surveillance earlier in the trial at nighttime. Give us a sense of if you can see much at night as opposed to the daytime view.
It's pretty difficult. It's a white and black kind of night vision that happens with the video. And so during daytime, it's a lot clearer to see. You can see like different colors of the vehicles and things like that. A lot of things that you see at night are simply just lights and headlights, and that's kind of what cues you into new things happening on the video is the traffic, the lights from the vehicles and things like that.
All right. During this investigation, were you aware of a description of the defendant's vehicle, Mark Gooch's vehicle?
Yes, sir.
And what was it? What did it look like?
We wound up determining that Mark Gooch most likely was driving a Volkswagen Jetta as his vehicle.
All right. And did you take photos of that vehicle?
Yes, sir, I did.
Where did you take those photos?
I took those photos of his vehicle parked in the barracks parking lot at Luke Air Force Base in April of 2020.
Exhibit 143, 144, and also 146.
Yes, sir. To go in numerical order, exhibit number 143 is going to be the Mr. Gooch's Volkswagen Jetta parked in the parking lot there at the Luke Air Force Base. I took this photograph from across the street, from an adjoining, like another barracks that's across the street.
And Lieutenant, let me have you, before you show the jury, let's
Oh, I'm sorry.
let's get those admitted. So that's 143, 144, is that another photo of that car?
Yes, sir. That's the another photograph that I took that's facing from the opposite direction that shows that driver's rear corner and the rear license plate.
All right, and finally, the 146, what's that?
That's going to be the still frame shot that I captured off of the video surveillance from the storage unit facility. It's the one frame of that, like, moving video. So I stopped it at that one frame and used this as an analysis.
All right, move to admit 143, 144, and 146.
Any objection?
Foundation is the time of the still photo.
That's fine, I can lay more foundation, Judge.
I'll sustain the objection.
As to 146, do you recall the time that you took that still photo?
This photo was captured around, well, it was captured on the video of January 18th. I took this still from the video in early April, around probably the 10th or the 13th is when I.
Okay. But the photo itself, or the still image itself, was from the surveillance video we talked about?
From the surveillance video, yes, sir.
And you remember the time roughly of when that image appears?
The image on here, if I recall correctly, it was around that 1600, 1620, sometime in that time frame. It's in that time frame
All
there.
right. Move to admit 146.
146 is admitted.
Uh,
146, yes. Well, you didn't remove to admit 143 and 144. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had an objection as to all three on foundation.
No objection to now, no objection to any of them.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. 143 and 144 admitted. Yeah, state's got permission to publish all three. You're welcome.
All right, 143, point out what we're seeing here.
Again, that's the picture that I took in early April when I was down at Luke Air Force Base. I believe this is on the 15th of April of 2020.
Laser point up there with the red
So Mr. Gooch's car is this Volkswagen Jetta parked here with this license plate here and the motorcycle parked next to it. This is the Jetta that is Mr. Gooch's. Again, this is the same picture parked in that lot. That is Mr. Gooch's parked on Luke Air Force Base.
Is there anything distinct that you looked at when you were trying to identify this car?
Yes, sir. If you can go back to that last picture.
43?
Yes, sir. So this is the angle of which the surveillance camera captured coming past the storage shed units. So this one is, when I looked at the picture from 146, I was looking at, there's two different types of window tint. So there's dark tint on the back window and light to no tint on the front passenger side window. There's a unique triangular pattern that's out of color with the rest of the car in the front. There's also that unique Volkswagen emblem on the front grille that's visible. And then you can see the lighter color wheels that are on the vehicle as well.
The license plate in the front. In Arizona, is it common to have a license plate?
Arizona, no, it does not require a front license plate.
That was a little more distinctive than most.
Correct, it stood out for us.
Let's go to 146.
There-
We're going to go to the this has been admitted already. And let me just switch over to the computer real quick. This would be 171 for the record. All right, this is 171. Can you see that, Lieutenant?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, and can you identify what we're looking at?
This is the surveillance video. Appears the January 18th, 2020. I think the time is 1600 hours and 47 seconds.
All right, and then convert that to civilian time for us.
So that's going to be 4 p.m.
All right, I'm going to push play here, and I'll have you tell me when to stop when you see a vehicle that you identified as something similar to Mark Gooch's vehicle, okay?
Yes, sir.
In fact, let's see. I can get it to work here. Just one moment, I'm sorry about that. All right, let's try that again. All right, and you see the time moving forward now?
Yes, sir, I can see it up in that upper left corner.
All right, and if you need to adjust yourself to see better, just let us know. Just tell me when to stop.
It went by fast. I don't think that was that car. I was using a different program when I was reviewing the video.
You need me to back up or slow down?
And stop. That's the car.
Let me back that up a little bit. All right. No, it's small on the screen, but can you identify some of those features you recognize when you saw the defendant's car in the parking lot?
Yes, sir. So knowing the video that I've watched and knowing the frame that I looked at, we can still from here see there's a small dot, or there's a circle, or there's a small different reflected color in the grille. There's a small white portion here below that emblem, or that different colored dot, and you can see that there's a lighter colored wheel color on that side. The program that I used to look at it, I was able to zoom in on that picture, and I could differentiate the tints of the window on that passenger side as well. You can see that the reflection of the photograph shows a darker tint on that back window, and the front has less or no tint.
All right. And identify the time we're looking at here.
The time appears to be 16:18. I can't differentiate the seconds out of that, but up in that upper left corner, it says 16:18, I believe.
All right, so that's 4:18 p.m., correct?
4:18 p.m. on 1/18 of 2020, yes, sir.
All right, let me go to 146 now. And 146, as you identified, was the zoomed-in version of that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right, showing 146. Is that a little better? Can you show us what you were talking about there?
Yes, sir. So from here, you can see that the white-colored rims or tires, rims. There's these rectangular pattern, white pattern on the front bumper. Above it is another metallic, different colored than the rest of the body of the car. As you're moving it through the frames, it clears up and comes in and out, but it looks more of a circular pattern of there. And then you can see the tint here is different than the tint here. It's just the way that the camera exposure captured it.
Is there any kind of raised portion on the roof that stood out?
There is, as you move it through the frame, just kind of like as you move it through the frames of the video, it clears up just like that emblem does, but there's this small little bit of differentiating line here as opposed to this line here.
All right, let's go back to 143 just so we can see what you're talking about. See anything on that car that would account for that?
Yes, sir. So there's a there's a sunroof cover right here on the top of Mr. Gooch's car right there.
All right, thank you. Now, aside from doing that comparison, looking at that video, did you also listen to certain phone calls between Mark Gooch and his family?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. And in particular, was there a phone call where Mark Gooch talked to his brother Sam?
Yes, sir, there is. There's several.
And was there one referencing wiping a phone? Do you recall that?
Yes, sir, there is.
Can you describe what that was about?
That phone call was on April 21st, after Mr. Gooch was booked into the Maricopa County Jail. There was 2 phone calls. The second phone call involves Mark talking with his brother Sam, and you can hear in the background his sister Joy talking as well. During the second phone call conversation, there's discussion about taking care of his financial stuff, and then Mark asks Sam if he can remotely wipe his phone, and specifically asks to make sure he wipes everything off the phone to include the SD card.
The SD card?
Yes, sir.
And the SD card is what?
It's like the memory file. It's a removable memory chip that's in all your cards. So when you buy a new phone, you take that SD card out, you put it in the new phone, and it keeps all your old stuff.
All right, so we asked Sam to remotely wipe his phone and the SD card.
Yes, sir.
And what was Sam's response?
I believe he said if he could get into it, he was going to work on it.
All right. May I have a moment, Judge?
Mr.
Good to see you. I just have a few questions for you in follow-up. When you did the analysis of the video from the storage unit at the building there at the Mennonite area, were you aware of whether Mr. Gooch had indicated that he had been there?
Mr. Gooch had not at that point, no. We were looking at the video, I believe on April 10th is when I started marking cars coming in.
This is before Mr. Gooch made a statement to law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
Did you look to try to find that same car, the same blue Jetta vehicle, 3.5 hours later on that same video?
I believe I looked through all the video to try and see an outbound car, yes, sir.
The answer is you did not find a blue Jetta vehicle outbound or inbound either way at 7:45 in the evening. Isn't that correct, sir?
That's correct, sir.
So if Mr. Gooch said that he was in the general vicinity that afternoon after he had purchased gas in Farmington and driven into the area, all you've done is simply confirm that to be true, correct?
Yes, sir.
Didn't you also invest a quantity of time, maybe a substantial quantity of time, sir, in trying to track down duct tape purchase?
We did spend some time trying to track down some duct tape, yes, sir.
Do I correctly state that the reason that was important or material was that the victim had been bound by a unique graphic pattern of duct tape?
Yes, sir, that is absolutely correct.
And you wanted to see whether you could tie Mr. Mark Gooch to any acquisition or possession of that kind of tape?
Yes, sir, we did.
What'd you do with that?
We didn't come back with any findings that we could link right directly to Mr. Gooch.
You looked at a lot of different stores in the area where Mr. Gooch lived, correct?
Yes, sir.
Hardware stores, other types of stores, correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, not finding any connection between Mr. Gooch and any duct, correct?
That's correct.
No further, thank you.
Mr. Barker?
Thank you. With regard to the duct tape, Lieutenant, would you describe that duct tape as unique, like a fingerprint?
It's definitely a unique pattern that I had never seen before, so it's definitely a unique to us for sure, and especially involving this case, yes.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Was that the only roll of duct tape ever created with that pattern on it?
There's probably multiple rolls of that tape, and yes, sir.
All right. Were you aware that it's sold at Walmart?
We got told that it was sold at a multitude of different locations, yes, sir.
Thank you. Counsel asked you about a statement that the defendant made saying he went to Farmington. Were you aware he said he was there 2 hours before he actually was there?
I'm not certain. I wasn't involved in that interview. So.
All right. You weren't a party to that interview, right?
No, sir.
That would be a question perhaps for Detective Nagel.
That's correct.
You were asked a question about vehicles outbound 3.5 hours after the defendant arrived in Farmington, and you said you couldn't distinguish vehicles at that point.
Yeah, 3 hours after.
It misstates the evidence, it's not what he said.
Let me rephrase. I'll agree, Judge.
All right.
So outbound, what did the cars look like 3.5 hours later?
The video itself is dark. It's late winter, early spring, so the night comes in pretty quickly. And so it's a very dark, exposed picture. So really all we're looking at is lights. And so being able to differentiate colors is going to be difficult at that point.
In fact, it's impossible because it's black and white at that point, right?
In fact, all I'm seeing is lights.
Right. Let's go back to the video. This is 171 for the record. Now I've queued it up. Do you see that time there?
I believe it says 1704 or 5:04 p.m.
5:04 p.m. Okay. Are you aware of the sunset time this time of year in Farmington?
I'm not a resident there, but I'm assuming, especially being in Flagstaff, it gets dark pretty early in the afternoon.
All right. Well, let's watch this video. I'll fast forward it here. I'll go fast. We'll do 30 times speed, starting at 5 p.m. And tell me what happens when the shadows start to go away and that sun sets.
So right now you can see one of the security lights is already starting to come on the left there in the storage yard.
Is it getting darker?
It's absolutely getting darker, yes, sir.
This is a little after 5:30 now, PM.
Yes, sir, 5:39 right now.
We still see a little bit of color, correct?
Correct, but now it's turned into the night vision mode of the security camera. So now it's all just darks and light coloring within that video, so,
All right, so you can't see color, can't distinguish color, correct?
no, sir.
And would you agree that the headlights make it almost impossible to see cars coming in?
Makes it very difficult. It starts to wash out the pixels, yes, sir.
And even cars exiting that area, the backlights do a similar thing, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Let me show you one other exhibit that's been admitted. This is exhibit 172. See that?
Yes, sir.
Is this a map? Little map of that light area?
Yes, sir, it is.
And we zoom in a little bit. Recognize those intersections there that are highlighted?
The 5569 and that left and right road that's equal with the lamp and light publisher label.
Is to be on the scope of redirect.
Or is that?
That's what you want to ask, and you're trying to lay foundation to be asked those questions? All right, so for that reason, the objection's overruled.
So do you recognize this road here as the road that we built?
Yes, sir.
And recognize this road as the road that's behind the road?
That is correct, sir.
So would someone exit this area without ever passing by that camp?
Yes, sir, they can.
That's all I have.
Mr. Griffin, did you want to ask any follow-up, given those additional questions by Mr. Barker? No?
Further questions? Thank you.
All right. Do any of the jurors have a question for this witness before he is excused? All right, I don't see any indication that the jury does. Mr. Barker, may the witness be excused and step down.
Yes, thank you.
You're excused and you may step down.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, I think this is a perfect time to take our morning recess. So we've been going almost an hour and a half. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, remember the admonition. Do not talk to anyone about the case. Do not let anyone talk to you about it. That includes each other, of course. And please keep an open mind. Do not formulate any opinions about the case. We're going to stand in recess 15 minutes. Please be seated. The record will reflect the jury's been excused for the morning recess. Counsel, anything further before we take our recess? All right. All right, we stand in recess. 15 minutes.